In the midst of a loneliness epidemic, the elimination of third places in community, and widespread recognition that our phones have at least something to do with this, big tech has never been more eager to address the problem with less human connection. It seems that every tech bro under the sun is on a mission to try and make AI our friends. But from what I've seen so far, it seems that we have slightly different understandings of what a friend even is. In today's context of centering yourself, protecting your peace, and cutting off people who don't serve you, I wanted to try and address this topic of AI friendship from a slightly different angle, looking at the level of friction that we don't want in our society anymore, looking at our conflict avoidance, and trying to tie it all together to see if perhaps AI friendships are enticing because we actually have a very different idea of what friendship looks like today.
December, every sign has its own mode. I was in love with the Sagittarius.
From the Diving Board is a show hosted by me, charlichats, dedicated to decoding digital culture by unpacking the hidden politics behind the screen.
Guys, this is so crazy. I don't know, I'm using a different mic, so I don't know how we're vibing, but please let me know if you want the SingStar mic back. The SingStar mic is actually my comfort during these, so having just this tiny little petite mic is crazy. Please just let me know if you prefer the audio in the other videos. I'm kind of testing this mic out because I have a reason to that I don't want to give away randomly. What the hell? Why am I being an influencer about it? No, I just have some exciting ideas coming up and I just wanted to test the audio quality on this, so would love your feedback. Honestly, let's just take a deep breath. It's almost December of 2025. That hasn't quite hit me yet. And I genuinely don't know how to feel about it because this time last year I was traveling. I was like, what the hell am I going to do with my next year? I had no real idea of my plans. And now here I am sitting here talking to you guys. It's just really surreal. And I feel like my year has been really, really fun in a really good way. It's been chaotic. It's been busy. There's been so many different chapters and phases. And I'd be really interested to know how you guys are feeling about going into 2026, which is, there should be flying cars, right? There should be flying cars, but instead we have AI friendships, which was the perfect segue to go into our episode. But in all honesty though, I think a recap of 2026 is, wow, she's a year ahead. A recap of 2025 is definitely in order. And I'd love to do a sit down chatty video. I know I've been talking about this for ages, but I actually would like to properly catch up with you guys, maybe a Q&A or something like that, because there's so many amazing new faces here. Thank you so much for joining. And I feel like introductions are in order. If you don't know much about me, I do post fairly regularly on my Instagram now at From the Diving Board, and I've been posting on TikTok again. I know she's got the love-hate relationship, the most toxic relationship with TikTok known to man, but I have been posting on there regularly. Exactly. It's that time of year. Fairly regularly. And my username on there is charlichats with 2 S's. All of it's in the bio description wherever you're listening or watching. But all that's to say is hello, how are you? I hope you're all doing well. I hope that your years are winding down a bit. I know a lot of people get really busy around this time as well. So I hope you have a time to just sit back, relax, do something nice, pencil in some me time or some friendship time, community time. I'm trying to use these phrases to like get you hyped for this video. It's all an act. It's all an ad to get you watching, okay? I hope you understand that. I'm kidding. But thank you so much. Honestly, again, I say it all the time, but I really mean it. Thank you for sticking around. I'm so excited to put more effort into this next year. So without further ado, let's jump on into the episode. I used to wonder why, as we got older, our friendship circles tended to get a lot smaller. It felt like in school, when you're surrounded by so many different people and your friends all of the time, if you were lucky to experience that, as you get out of these institutional spaces, your friendship circles just seem to decline until sometimes it's only really your nuclear family that you're spending everyday time with. I think in the context of what we are consistently hearing as a loneliness epidemic, and where so many people are feeling more isolated and disconnected than ever despite social media, it's very interesting that what we are craving is wider community connection and platonic love, yet socially and culturally we are still really prioritizing the nuclear family way of life. And this is also because our schedules become busier. We're living in a cost of living crisis. We're working harder to make ends meet. We need to spend more time in the workplace, making money, however that is. And so the only people that you are really seeing are those that you live with, for a lot of us at least as we get older. A lot of us end up in the situation, particularly in our 20s, when we realize the only time we have to see our friends is for like a quick 3-minute call in between various appointments in some sort of car park situation. You're like, oh, this is beautiful. This will do. That's as good as it's going to get for the next 6 months. So may as well enjoy it. Of course, as neoliberalism grew in popularity and we were really sold this idea of centering the self, being our own personal brands, all the happiness would come when we could be self-sufficient, provide for ourselves, have enough money, have all the things that we would want in life, and then we could be happy. This idea really eliminated a lot of ideas of community and love and connection as being fundamental to our lives. The idea that we may be miserable in the rat race, but that eventually things will all come good is an ideology that a lot of us live by. Focusing in on neoliberalism for a moment, it really started to expand in the 1990s as these ideas of the personal brand became kind of corporate speak, and these ideas of you being able to take control of your life, just work harder and you'll be able to have everything, experience everything. And at the same time, the internet was becoming really popular, really commonplace, and globalization was on the rise. Interestingly, I wanted to see whether or not loneliness was a topic that was being spoken about at this time, because obviously that would support the thesis that neoliberalism has a lot to do with it. And to be honest, I was quite interested in the fact that loneliness has been a topic of conversation at so many different points in the last 100 years. After World War II, there was a big discussion about loneliness in sociology and culture and community, as well as in the 1970s and in the 1990s, and of course the pandemic. So it seems that after a lot of crises, big global events, this conversation of loneliness seems to rear its head. At least today, it really comes off like the loneliness epidemic is a totally new concept that we're only experiencing today in 2025, but the concept itself has been around for quite a long time. It just didn't necessarily have the same terminology. So when I was looking at research articles in the 1990s, there were quite a few hypotheses to suggest that the internet specifically might have some sort of relationship with the level of social connection that we were feeling, but the results were very, very varied. The first study that I came across was quite a big one by Robert Kraut, a 1998 study, and he essentially suggested that the use of the internet had very significant negative impact on social connection. So his whole idea was the more someone uses the internet, the less connected they will feel and be, and even engage with their family. So obviously this was quite a significant study at the time, but it definitely did not come without its debate. In fact, a lot of studies that came after really tried to criticize Kraut's findings. There was a study that came out only a couple of years later in 2000 by Axel Franzen, who had a lot of skepticism with the results that Robert Kraut found, and in fact suggested that the use of the internet had no tangible effect really, whether positive or negative, on the level of social connection and community that was felt by an individual. You know, this is actually crazy. In the article, because it was written back in the 90s or early 2000s, article said something like electronic mail could potentially increase positive feelings in communication. It took me like a solid few seconds to be like, electronic mail? Wow, what is that? Like, literally forgot that email is electronic mail, duh. If you grew up in the early 2000s, which most of you probably did, or a lot of you did, do you remember sending emails to your friends? Because I have vivid memories. I can even go back on my Gmail account and see the emails that I sent my friends. Tell me why I was doing a full graphic design spread. Like I had Comic Sans pink size 52 font saying, "Hi, do you want to come with me to the park tomorrow? Love, Charlie. 700 kisses" at the bottom. Those things need to be archived in the National Archives. We don't have that today. We don't have emails. Bring back email communication and bring back word art. Honestly, if there's one thing you take away from this video, we need to email our friends more. Anyway, I digress. In 2002, another study also called into question the findings that Robert Kraut found. It was a study undertaken by 2 PhD students and 1 sociology professor at the UCLA. And to quote them, they said, "There is no evidence of displacement of face-to-face relationships with online ones, and internet use is slightly associated with a decreased level of loneliness. However, people who have online friends are more lonely than those who don't." So clearly these findings called into question a lot of things about whether or not there was a relationship with internet usage and social relationships. And obviously there was enough people interested in the dynamic to at least pose the questions at an academic level. This all really changed when the correlation between social relationships and the internet completely shifted, and the internet almost became a place for social connection with the advent of social media. At the time, social media was revolutionary. I mean, I think we can all say to be able to communicate with friends and family from across the world, to share images, to be able to comment and really feel involved in someone's life in that early stage of social media was truly magical for a lot of people. Even from the outset, when Facebook was first started around 2005, Mark Zuckerberg didn't necessarily only create Facebook to strengthen and further entrench our existing friendships, but instead he said the platform was an icebreaker to help you make friends. The focus was not so much about quality of friendships, but quantity. And this was obvious by the fact that the number of friends you had on Facebook was one of the key features that you saw when you became friends with another person on Facebook, right? Like, it's one of the first details you see: their profile photo, their name, number of friends. And of course, it wasn't long before Facebook and Instagram essentially became billboards. Friends became secondary to the app despite its name being social media, which ultimately astronomically shifted advertising. On this point, a friend of mine recently read Sarah Wynne Williams' book called Careless People. So Sarah Wynne Williams is a whistleblower from Meta. She was working at Facebook in a very high position as public policy officer, I believe, or public policy head. And she basically claims that your specific individual data points and private information could literally change the way that advertisers would try to interact with you. So a really interesting example was if you were a teenager between the ages of 13 or 17 and you were a girl and you'd posted a selfie and then you deleted the selfie, Sarah Wynne Williams essentially says that would be crucial information and data to sell to advertising companies to basically indicate that your emotional state is vulnerable, that you're feeling insecure. So beauty advertisers could come in to sell you beauty products or different things that would be associated with lower levels of self-esteem and higher levels of consumption to try and rectify the problem or insecurity that you are feeling. But all that's to say is that obviously now the app is flooded with advertising, and influencers are really putting in the hard yards to make the advertising aspect of these apps not so abrasive. Harvey Norman. Can you imagine if every time you scrolled on Instagram a Harvey Norman ad came up? That would get me off the app, honestly. That would beat the doom scrolling. Algorithms themselves are designed as slot machines. There have been various studies that I've quoted on this podcast before that literally link areas of the brain that flare up or are triggered while you're gambling are the exact same areas that in your brain that are triggered when you scroll on TikTok. All of these things are by design to keep you scrolling on the app so they can collect more data from you to sell to various advertisers to then make more money. This original version of connection was dead a long time ago. Social media apps generally have a lot more to do with connecting you with capitalism than they do with connecting you with people. And in fact, this was written about in a piece for The Atlantic by Damon Beres called "The Age of Anti-Social Media is Here." And he says the social media era is over. Despite the fact that Facebook's mission statement is still very similar to what it was back in 2005, specifically build the future of human connection and the technology that makes it possible, this is simply not how I feel about engaging on social media anymore. Beres writes that over the past past 15 years, face-to-face socialization has declined precipitously. Great word, Damon. COVID, of course, had a lot to do with this, fostering social anxiety and feelings of not wanting to go out because going out and interacting with people was a legitimate health threat. But the truth is, the decline in socialization was happening well before COVID. There's a reason why the 1990s sitcom Friends gained so much popularity, and so many people were obsessed with living with a group of your best friends in New York City. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? I'm sorry. There was a real fantasy, and there really always has been this fantasy of living with your friends through different media and hanging out with your friends all the time. Sex and the City is another huge one. This idea that these four powerful corporate women are able to hang out with each other almost every day is just not really the reality that we are able to fund. Hanging out with my friends is a bloody expensive ordeal, I've got to say. Like, we're going to the wine bar, we're going to the pub, we're going to a cafe, $40 later at least. And it's not that non-financial activities don't exist, but I think it's also the fact that a lot of people these days do work in very diverse capacities. A lot of people are working remote, a lot of people are working overtime to fund their lives, a lot of people are working in freelance, a lot of people are doing a lot of work to try and fund their lives. Fitting in regular catch up with friends is genuinely a mission. So instead, to ensure that our system remains the same and the solution can be a little bit easier, we don't even have to lift a finger. We can continue with our phone addictions. We don't even have to leave our bedrooms. We don't have to make more friends. The solution is tech-based, and the solution is AI. AI, ChatGPT.
I love AI. Do you use AI? Absolutely. Do you use ChatGPT?
This solution follows the kind of thinking that we've been seeing a lot of recently, which was coined by Mark Andreessen. It's this idea that, quote, there is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology. The solution is AI friends, lovers, psychologists, teachers, personal assistants. Cut out people. Honestly, who needs them? Who needs them? Human connection? I literally don't even care. Zuckerberg has taken this transition extremely seriously, noting that AI, quote, probably won't replace personal connections or real life connections, end quote, but you do have to wonder whether that's genuinely what he's thinking. The concerns are obviously plentiful, from the fact that most AI is still designed with various errors embedded in them. There's biases. The data that it's built on contains so many different harmful biases about people, systems, groups. The fact that a lot of AI is designed to enhance the view of the person talking to it, or at least treat the user as if they're some sort of god-like figure, never disagreeing with them. AI professes to often know everything, but frequently makes mistakes. But I really wanted to hone in on this particular concern around AI, that is the lack of friction and conflict avoidance that an AI friend, if you can call it that, would potentially encourage or at least enhance in our day-to-day lives. Difficult conversations are made easy with AI, partly because chatbots would never disagree with us. And Damon Berres writes, quote, friction is inevitable in human relationships. It can be uncomfortable, even maddening. Yet friction can be meaningful, as a check on selfish behaviour or an inflated self-regard, as a spur to look more closely at other people, as a way to better understand the foibles and fear we all share. End quote. In general, if we look at the landscape recently over the last few years from a technology standpoint, friction has been declining all over the place. Convenience culture is making everything accessible and easy, which has its perks. It's incredible that so many people who might have been disenfranchised from being able to access groceries, for example, or services like psychology services due to either their varying abilities or due to location, rural and remote locations is a huge one here in Australia, or age and mobility as well. Literally life-changing that technology has been able to make this more accessible and convenient. The removal of friction and increase in convenience does create this demand for everything to be easy and everything to be convenient. And I think it's really interesting because originally I would say a lot of this was designed to make our lives more focused on doing enjoyable things, or at least that tends to be how it's marketed. But if you look at Veblen's theory of the leisure class, which I have quoted again in various videos before, it's very possible that the only people who are tossing out going to the grocery store and instead popping in leisure activities like going to golf tend to be in the upper classes, because the rest of us would be trying to cram in likely as much paid work as possible. There's certainly another conversation to be had here about the fact that now that shopping and consumerism is so convenient, a lot of us are mindlessly consuming as well, which then suggests that maybe we're not making our lives much better by having access to such easy shopping. Like shopping with a click on TikTok Shop, for example, is so common, so huge. I think that all of these things come together in our demand and almost expectation for things to be easy. So in many ways in this context, the introduction of AI on a day-to-day basis is simply just an extension of convenience culture and frictionless society. Damon Berres wrote that according to Zuckerberg, quote, "One of the main things people use Meta AI for today is advice about difficult conversations with bosses or loved ones, what to say, what responses to anticipate." And I would be lying if I've never done this. I have used AI to write difficult emails, to write difficult texts, but I think there's a real distinction between using it selectively as a tool to cut down on time when you really have no one to ask for assistance and really don't know how to approach a certain conversation, versus using it as a regular companion. And I also want to caveat here that I did come across an interesting study which basically suggested that a lot of people don't go into an AI friendship, quote, air quote, with the intention of such. A lot of the time people fall into it accidentally. And so I do think there's a real fine line and potentially slippery slope here between using AI to help you in difficult situations that might involve writing a tricky text to a boss. That can very quickly go to everyday companionship if you want it to be and if you use it regularly enough. And from the outset, to be really clear and to try and make it as evident as possible that I'm not trying to be judgmental on the users of AI as their companion, but instead it's actually the situation that we're in that is so sad that so many people feel the need to rely on technology to have social connection. I think it's a deeply flawed systemic problem, really, that we're relying on technology, or that certain people are relying on technology to be able to have that level of human connection and interaction. Completely dystopian solution to a problem that really is a lack of human connection, to replace that with artificial connection instead of investing in community spaces, community networks, community engagement. I would say a lot of people find it unsettling as well. I don't think it's a completely radical take for me to say I don't like the idea of an AI friend. In fact, looking at the response from the Friend campaign in New York City, a lot of people feel the same way. A lot of you might have been aware of the ad campaign that came out earlier this year in New York City subway. Essentially, it was a very clean poster. Well, they didn't remain very clean. It was a poster design where it was basically a definition of the word friend, and it was advertising Avi Schiffman's new company, which is called Friend, which is basically an AI-pendant chatbot that sits around your neck and keeps you company in times where a friend might be nice. The poster simply read, "Friend, someone who listens, responds, and supports you." Very soon, they were completely defaced with graffiti. "We don't want AI," was the general sentiment that the graffiti read on almost every single poster, to the point that when they were replaced, they were almost immediately defaced again. In a piece for the New York Times, I was reading through various comments. It was a prompt that they put out, and a couple stood out to me. The first comment I want to read says, "This pendant is in every way equal to a fake friend with ulterior motives. One who spews out words that are meant to flatter you, interrupts conversations at random, and insists they are better than your other companions because they will, quote, never leave dirty dishes in your sink." The pendant can listen and respond, but does it respond to help you or to please you so more people will purchase pendants? Yet another comment wrote, "I think a friend is someone that listens to you, that is there for you, and someone that a person can joke with. AI doesn't equate to a real friend, but I still think that it could fill in as a real friend for people that don't have many real friends." And many, of course, were careful to note that there are genuine surveillance and data privacy concerns about this pendant. It's going to collect, if you wear it every single day, your daily routines, where you go, what you do, your deepest, darkest secrets, your deepest, darkest thoughts, all the personal information about you that pretty much you possess, because you're encouraged when you wear it to kind of tell it everything, to act like it's kind of almost a journal, but also a friend. But according to Avi Schiffman, and I just want to say, he's 22. So although I don't necessarily agree with this company and what he's trying to sell here, it's pretty insane. Like, you gotta hand it to him. That's insane that he's generated so much conversation and communication around this, which, as I'll discuss shortly, is kind of the whole point of this. Interestingly, he essentially says that vandalism was the point of this campaign. It was all part of the plan to get people riled up. In today's era of meta-irony and irony, a bit of rage bait purporting to fix the loneliness crisis with just this AI pendant is almost certainly going to get the city talking, and he knew that. Yet Schiffman says, despite its name, the device isn't really supposed to be a friend or to replace any human relationships. As he stated to Mateo Wong in a piece for The Atlantic, the device is more a journal, a therapist. He does then say best friend, so I'm slightly confused, but all in one package. He actually did then later liken speaking to the pendant as speaking to God, which I mean, I've not had experience speaking to God, but that sounds crazy. That sounds really wild to me. I don't know about it. But it really feeds into this whole rage bait thing, because he even said after saying that, I've said this in the past and not many people liked it. So there's a choice there. That was a choice. And at this point, I'm really wondering whether this entire thing is rage bait, which is apparently a fair and reasonable assumption, because Mateo Wong in his piece then goes on to say, and this was really interesting, throughout the AI boom, picking apart sincere statements from hyperbolic PR or just plain trolling has become harder and harder. When Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, says he wants to build a gigawatt of AI infrastructure every week, a data center that uses as much electricity as a major American city, it's both ridiculous and completely serious. He's capturing mindshare and receiving funding for these efforts in spite of a lack of clarity about how generative AI will actually make money or truly serve society. To outright market an AI friend rather than the more measured companion or assistant or chatbot is to play with that confusion head on. Wong concludes the piece suggesting that Friend, the company, is more an art installation to prod public attitudes than a business. At least yet. Because of course the truth is, we can all recognize that AI is not and probably won't ever really be a friend in the literal sense. There's no giving in this relationship. There's no reciprocity from you. And if you want to, you could totally use and abuse this thing, because ultimately it's not real. It doesn't have feelings. So the way that you interact it is going to be completely different to interacting with a human, even if you try to make it have as strong a human-like relationship as possible. As Schiffman wrote, his pendant is a friend in that it listens, responds, and supports you, but where I'm sitting, that's the bare minimum when it comes to human friendships. There's such little intentionality about this relationship that you can have with an AI pendant or chatbot. Limited nurturing or challenging of your own ideas. If, say, the chatbot was to say something that you didn't want to hear, you could just walk away or turn it off. To me, it sounds more like constantly talking to yourself, or at least stroking your ego literally 24/7, which I can see some people in, they might want that. Many billionaires may want that. Connection is what we're craving. If the solution is supposedly connection, this isn't going to do it. Perhaps you'll feel more connected to yourself than anyone else, but as we've seen recently, AI chatbots are, as I said, notoriously riddled with errors, mistakes, mishaps, malfunctions, biased thinking patterns that can also lead to the horrific outcomes of telling you to do things that are tragic. If a person encouraged you to do these awful things, and I am speaking cryptically here because trying to be careful, but if a human encouraged you to do horrible things, there would be repercussions. There would be legal repercussions and routes you could go down. Currently at this stage, there's a huge question mark over the responsibility, the vicarious liability, and who is really accountable to these types of situations and whether or not a chatbot really can be. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't any place for AI in healthcare, for example, or mental health or therapy. I think it's a potentially really, really important and amazing opportunity to increase and improve accessibility to services that might not otherwise have been accessible to. But again, I think that putting all of our eggs in this basket doesn't necessarily allow for genuine human connection and the needs that need to be supplied to those people, for example, and it should never be in place of humanity. There is a lot of research that still needs to be done in this space, and so I am careful because I think a whole lot of this could completely change as the technology changes and as more and more research comes out. But at this current stage, I'm not hopeful, or at least I don't like the idea of AI completely overtaking all of these positions, particularly in therapy, for example. But if we take it back a notch and return back to neoliberalism and the current culture and society that we're in, I think that we have to examine really critically the ideas of friendship that we, particularly among Gen Z, hold and that have been really promoted on social media and in our current culture. Because I genuinely believe we are an extremely conflict avoidant generation. And I'll put my hand up and say, I absolutely hate it. I hate having difficult conversations. I just hate it. It makes me feel uneasy even talking about it. But I also know and can recognize that after having tricky conversations with some of the people that I love, our friendship almost always gets stronger because we've been able to navigate a challenge together and to voice our opinions and hurt over things that if I was completely going to avoid confrontation and conflict altogether, we would never have been able to get to that point, and we may have just built resentment and the friendship might not have been there anymore. This feeds into this rhetoric, and what I'm kind of referring to here is this rhetoric that we should be cutting off people who don't serve you to protect your peace first and foremost, which I do think stems from this individualistic idea of self-love and radical self-love in a way that's almost become a bit exploited. And from the outset, again, I hope it's really clear that I'm not in any way saying that you shouldn't be cutting off people that are genuinely harming you, abusing you, not treating you in the way you should be treated. What I'm more talking about is the freedom with which we use these phrases. As soon as there's a tiniest bit of conflict or distinction between opinions, or as soon as someone maybe raises a problem with you, we're so quick to cut them off. The rhetoric online, at least, is cut them off. You don't need them in your life.
Quick intermission because I clearly didn't have my glasses on when I read the name of this poor journalist who wrote this piece that I'm going to talk about forever. And her name is actually Ali Volpe, not Vope. So I'm really sorry for butchering this for the rest of the video. I'm so sorry, Ali.
In a piece on this topic by Ali Volpe for Vox called "Protecting Your Peace Can Kill Friendships," she writes that this wave of thinking suggests that almost any conflict is a sign of dysfunction and toxicity, that relationships should be easy. Our culture has become so obsessed with this idea of self-preservation, wellness culture, protection of the individual, and self-sufficiency. But when these concepts and ideas are exploited, it can actually ironically lead to the complete undermining of all of those things. Vope writes that, quote, "People should, without a doubt, feel empowered to distance themselves from those who have inflicted profound pain and abuse. However, many experts say there's been an overcorrection. The impulse to isolate and cut people off at the first sign of conflict can actually be detrimental to mental and social health." She further goes on to note that this act of culling people off is actually really unnatural because historically, from an evolutionary perspective, cutting off social ties was a threat to our own survival and could lead to being outcast or even completely outed from a group, which was literally necessary for our continued existence. Except today, obviously, self-sufficiency is now possible and even encouraged to survive under neoliberalist capitalism. That the threat has almost been flipped. Don't waste your precious time having difficult conversations. Don't put your energy into these relationships when you could be putting your energy into making yourself better, into self-improvement, which usually does center yourself as if you're your own company, entity. Vope goes on to write, "The desire to guard yourself from the pains of the world, or at least your inner world, is understandable when everything else seems beyond your control. Maybe you're worried about the state of the country under Donald Trump's presidency. Maybe, like nearly a quarter of Americans, you're struggling to stay on top of your bills. As these external stresses mount, some may turn to their interpersonal relationships as a corrective. As a result, those who are zealous about protecting their peace may not be able to accurately discern between an argument and unacceptable behavior, a moment of contention and a toxic person. The consequence of a culture of conflict avoidance and this inability to distinguish when a conflict is genuinely harmful and abusive versus when it could ultimately result in a productive and meaningful outcome is one where we don't actually prioritize meaningful friendships, and when we don't really value conflict as almost a fundamental and necessary part of friendship as well. When our tolerance for conflict becomes so low, our ability to have these conversations, like we literally lose the ability to do so. And to tie this back into AI and AI friendships, I do think that there's something to be said about our expectation that everything's going to be easy, convenient, frictionless, but also that relationships are to serve you and to prioritize you as the individual rather than having this reciprocal and sometimes challenging dynamic where your errors, foibles are called into question, and they should be. We should be relying on our friends to call us out when we do things wrong, when we make mistakes. When we lose value for those difficult situations and when we expect things to be so easy, it's kind of no wonder that we are viewing AI as a genuine possibility and replacement for human connection, because it is offering a very easy, meaningful to an extent friendship where support is the crux, but kind of not those difficult aspects. And ultimately, to tie it all together, I do, as always, think it has everything to do with neoliberalism and the fact that we're prioritizing so much of our day-to-day lives with work because we have to, career milestones, circling our lives around the nuclear family. There's not enough social welfare. I say that every single time, but more social welfare would genuinely cut back the amount of time we have to invest in our own corporate growth and like climbing the corporate ladder to be able to exist in the rat race that is modern society. And I think that so often the first to go when we're busy and we're trying to do all these things is social connection and platonic friendship. It's always really empowering when you can see that organizations who work in this space fundamentally agree and there's evidence to support that. And so I had a look at this company here in Australia, an organization called Ending Loneliness Together, and their mission statement is to raise awareness and reduce the negative impact of loneliness and social isolation in our community through evidence-based intervention and advocacy. And the focus outlined in their recommendation report was to increase funding for community-based activities that strengthen social connection. And they pointed specifically to digitalization as a barrier, not necessarily an enhancer for human connection. I also had a look at various local governments in the United Kingdom. There was a really cool case study page, and essentially it pointed to community engagement activities that have genuinely supported local citizens in feeling connected and addressing loneliness. And these ranged from funding community libraries to funding craft and arts activities to funding local sports organizations to funding local volunteer cafes, for example. All of these things point to the fact that it sounds so silly. I keep thinking in my head that I'm just sounding ridiculous. But if we're trying to address social connection, it makes sense to fund community activities instead of technology that take the place of humans. And again, to drill down this point again, I have huge sympathy for anyone who is feeling lonely and anyone who is feeling disconnected. I think it is such a failing that we are so dedicated to ourselves and it's so self-focused, individualistic focus, hyper-individual self-improvement. And I just think it's really sad that we're not prioritizing, or at least there isn't as much funding as there could be or should be in prioritizing community connectedness. But that's not to say that it doesn't exist. And I think those case studies in the United Kingdom really highlight that there's a lot going on out there. Check your local events, check your local newspapers, check your local magazines. And on social media, I've been seeing so many cool events that some of my friends have been running clubs, day parties, cafes are often hosting really interesting events. All these things where you can meet really interesting people and you can put yourself out there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was way more chatty and conversation than I expected it to be, but I hope you enjoyed and I really am sending so much love. Thank you so much for all the amazing comments, feedback, beautiful support that I've received over this year. I don't know why I'm acting like this is my last video of the year. year it's not. There's more coming, I promise. But yes, there will be one in the works on romantic relationships and AI, which will touch on patriarchy, misogyny, all the things. I just need to get going on the research in that front because I really want to make that a big one. So if you have any ideas, any concepts, any discussion points you want to float, always send me a message on Instagram at From the Diving Board. I'm always loving reading your messages. Love you guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.